Welcome to a brand new show here on Daily World Television called Is It Really True? My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host. Folks, this show is really simple. What we do is examine a wide variety of claims in many different areas. These can be made on the internet, these can be statements that appear in print by people. And what we do is we tell you whether or not it is true. One of the great things about facts is that they can be independently checked by anyone who bothers to do so. Real facts stand inviolate and independent and apart from people's biases, prejudices, or opinions. That's the greatest thing about facts. So here on Is It Really True? We not only prove something one way or another. What we do is we give you enough information so that you can independently verify the data yourself so that you can come to your own conclusions. Now today's episode, our very first one, concerns a subject that still is on the mind and is of great concern by millions of people in the United States and also around the world. This is the subject of the assassination of American President John F. Kennedy. On November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy was murdered while he rode defenseless and unprotected in his presidential limousine, waving to the crowd, smiling and greeting them, on the streets of Dallas, Texas. 53 years later, this event still troubles many people. As many as 90% of all Americans incorrectly believe that Kennedy was killed as a result of some sort of conspiracy. One of the key eyewitnesses to Kennedy's assassination, she was standing physically near him when he was shot and killed, is a woman named Jean Hill. She rose to world fame status when she wrote a book about what she saw, and she was prominently featured in Oliver Stone's movie JFK, which is solely responsible, unfortunately, for spreading some of the greatest amount of nonsense and myths and lies about the Kennedy assassination than any other movie to date. In this first episode, we will expose Jean Hill. We will prove to you that her account is not credible. It is exploitive. In fact, Jean Hill has done something that is just terrible. She has lied about what she said she saw, and we can prove it. Here on Is It Really True? We give you the facts that allow you to verify the data for yourself so that you can decide the issues accordingly. You don't have to take our word for things. In fact, we encourage you to double check what we're saying and exposing. This is the point of the show, Is It Really True? So is what Jean Hill claims really true? The answer is no. We can prove it. Let's begin now with a quick flashback on some of the key highlights from John F. Kennedy's stellar career as a politician and when he was president. Here are some excerpts from some of his greatest speeches. Then we will get into the undeniable, irrefutable, and conclusive evidence that exposes Jean Hill as a fraud and a liar.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. We shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
Chosen for the present is full of hazards, as all paths are. But it is the one most consistent with our character and courage as a nation and our commitments around the world. The cost of freedom is always high, but Americans have always paid it. And one path we shall never choose, and that is the path of surrender or submission.
All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
And that is the most important topic on earth, peace. What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
U.S. President John F. Kennedy, the youngest elected President of the United States, tragically murdered, assassinated on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, as he rode in his open limousine. This is actual footage of Kennedy's assassination as filmed by Abraham Zapruder. The fatal headshot that killed John F. Kennedy. Jean Hill, shown here, was one of the closest eyewitnesses to President Kennedy when he was killed. She wrote a book called JFK, The Last Dissenting Witness, with Bill Sloan. In the book, and in subsequent interviews on many TV shows, including The Maury Povich Show, she famously claimed, and she lied when she made this statement, that she had seen the other gunman, a second assassin, standing on the grassy knoll hill, who fired the fatal headshot that killed Kennedy. Many people believe that Kennedy was killed by a shot from the front, from the grassy knoll area. They also believe another assassin shot at Kennedy from the rear, from the 6th floor window of the Texas State Book Depository. In reality, and we will prove this in an upcoming episode of this series on Kennedy's murder, all shots that killed Kennedy came from the rear only. Again, we will prove this in a future episode. But let's get back to Jean Hill. Many people believe that Kennedy was killed by a shot from the front because he appears to fall backwards. Many people wrongly believe that when a human being is shot, that they always fall backwards. The reason most people believe this is because they watch Hollywood movies. Most people, thankfully, have never seen another human being shot in real life. Hollywood doesn't use real bullets. They use blanks. The reason bodies always fly backwards in Hollywood movies is because it looks a lot more dramatic than what might otherwise happen in real life. Quite often, bodies fall forward towards the shooter, not always backwards. It all depends on whether the force of the bullet exiting the body is sufficient enough to push the body towards the direction of the shot. In Kennedy's case, when the bullet entered the rear of his skull, when it exploded out of the right side, it pushed his head back. There was no shot from the front. We will prove this in a future episode. But let's talk about Jean Hill's testimony. To help identify where Jean Hill was and appears in the various photographs taken by witnesses that day, we've added red arrows and markers on the pictures to identify where Jean Hill is. Notice that she is not even bothering to cross the street. Notice that at times she's even on the ground because she's fearing for her life like others were when they heard shots ring out. That's understandable. But notice that she's not running across the street and she's not chasing any assassin. So her story is completely false. Now, you have to imagine what it must be like to witness the assassination of the President of the United States, to be tens of meters away from the fatal headshot, to see President Kennedy's head explode, his brain matter going up in the air and falling back on the officers who were behind him in the motorcade. It's a terrible, terrible thing to see. And yet Jean Hill, who not only witnessed that, as she looked back at President Kennedy at the last minute before the fatal headshot, she then makes up a story that she saw the second assassin. It takes a really special person to do that. And when I say special, I don't mean it in a kind way. One has to be especially cynical, calculating, manipulative, and an outright liar and fraud to try to claim something that isn't true. It's bad enough that Kennedy was murdered. It's even worse in some ways that Jean Hill has decided to lie and has fed and helped fuel the conspiracy myth today that most Americans unfortunately believe in, thanks to liars and frauds like her and people like Oliver Stone and his movie JFK, which does not conform to real historical fact. Instead, it pushes a political and social agenda that Stone has, and that is wrong, and he should be condemned and exposed for doing so. We're going to close out this first episode of Is It Really True by showing you just a couple of the very graphic official autopsy photos that show President Kennedy dead. The reason we're showing you these pictures is not to gross you out, but to go ahead and drive home the point of just how sick Jean Hill is and how her story is just beyond sane. Ask yourself this question: who would dare look at an event like this, be a witness to it, see someone's head blown off as these graphic photos show, and then lie and say, yep, I saw that second gunman and I chased him? That's the kind of person Jean Hill was. She was a fraud, she lied, she was cynical, and she became famous and made money off of that behavior. Shame on her. Shame also on people like Oliver Stone, Jim Garrison, and others like author Jim Marrs, who promote the Kennedy conspiracy nonsense and have laughed all the way to the bank at the expense of the truth. Thanks for joining us here on Daily World Television. My name is Kal Korff and I'm your host. We'll be back soon with another episode of Is It Really True?